You're putting that energy into our topic today, right? Interracial marriages. Interracial marriages have been occurring throughout history. There was the Greek Alexander the Great and his marriages to the princesses of his eastern conquered lands. Another historical figure is Great Britain's King George III and his marriage to Queen Sophia Charlotte, whose portrayal in the hit Netflix series Bridgerton drew attention to her racial ambiguity. Yet interracial marriages have been plagued with challenges throughout history, including stigma. A case in point is South Africa and apartheid that they went through, where such marriages were considered a crime. Prominent comedian Trevor Noah, himself a product of an interracial relationship, openly speaks about the challenges his family faced. On this week's episode, my co-host and I will be unpacking interracial marriage today and how couples are navigating the nuances of tradition and culture in their union, and hear expert opinion about the overall impact of interracial marriage in our world today. Welcome to Our Voices.
Well, here in the United States, it would be impossible to talk about interracial marriage without reflecting on the case of Loving versus Virginia that changed the course of marriage. Interracial marriage is so common today that one may not realize that it was only 50 years ago that it was made legal. Our colleague Deepak Dobal introduces us to a couple in Nebraska who is raising their biracial children. Let's take a look.
We were at the Union at the university. It's basically a place where people come and relax and you check your emails and your class schedules. And I just happened to see this head of curly hair, and I had to get closer to her. And the closer I got, the better she looked, and I had to introduce myself. So here we are, 20 years later.
I have 3 kiddos. Isaac is our oldest. Ian is our middle child. Isabella is our youngest. She's 7.5. We homeschool them. We have for the last 5.5 years.
Our children, they do have the best of both worlds in having a black father and a white mother. In life, they don't have to think about choosing a side. Only questions that the kids have asked us about race is, Dad, why is your skin darker than Mom's?
But we're not clueless that it's there. And in due time, as those discussions come into play, he's like, you're old enough, you're mature enough, it's time for you to learn this. And it may come up because our child has a question, or it may come up because of something they're exposed to. Much of what people are seeing and hearing today is based on the hate. And when hate is represented, it doesn't matter what form you're seeing it in. It's a matter of the heart. These are interpersonal, relational conflicts that have been stirred up. And some people, it just started. Some people, that was inbred in them from the day they were born. And heart issues can only be resolved within someone's most inner thoughts. We can't go around and fix other people's heart. This doesn't go in a basket, sweetie. You keep it up here.
Based on what we're experiencing now and the divisions that we have in our society, I have to be above that. If I were to dwell on the what I look like and what somebody thinks about what I look like, I won't be successful as I am right now.
I think you look good. I'm just saying, I don't know.
But we shouldn't deny that there's something going on and it's bad.
Yeah.
We need to focus on how can we make it better.
I think interracial couples are so cute because of how their children are really receiving the best of both worlds, as he said. He said, the closer I looked at her, the more beautiful she looked. It's as if, when you first see somebody, you see their race, you see their culture, but when the closer you look, you realize you're not so different.
You realize it's the heart.
It's the heart.
It's just the outside look. By the end of the day, inside, we all have the same organs, the same kind of blood, the same kind of... we are all the same.
I don't know, the food might be different, though.
Yeah.
So that's a discussion.
It's exciting. It's adventurous.
That's right.
That's a discussion to have. Well, so interracial marriages do bring together people from different cultures. which leads to blending of two different worlds, right? It can bring a unique blending of cultures in the relationship. However, it can also lead to culture shock for one or both partners as they navigate differences in customs, values, and traditions. Joining us live from Toronto to discuss her own experience is Amina Yakaka Mustafa Babakura, a doctor, skincare business owner, and mother of two. Welcome, Amina. Thank you for joining our discussion today. Amina, are you able to hear us? Okay, so we might be having technical difficulties. Can you speak again so that we're sure that you're able to hear us? Excellent, thank you. We can hear you as well. So, Amina, we understand that you're married to a Canadian Arab and you're Canadian Nigerian. I want you to tell me, the first thing that comes to my mind, honestly, is disciplining children and parenting. Did you guys talk about parenting and how you were going to raise your children with the blend of such strong cultures as your Nigerian and his Arab? That would be my first question for you.
Actually, we not. But then, because our religion, we both practice the same faith, so it's most likely that we're going to bring up the children in that direction. But then still there are differences because the way I was brought up is totally different from the way he was brought up. He basically grew up in Canada. Meanwhile, I grew up in Nigeria, and you know how parenting is back home. Sometimes we clash, especially with the older one when she does something and I try to correct her by tapping her hands or her butt. She's like, no, 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 don't do that. Just give her time out. I'm like, no, this is not how my mom trained me. So we have we experience those type of differences, but then again, it still comes down to wanting them to grow, how we want them to be in the future, like what values we want them to have.
I think that it's very difficult in interracial couples, in intercultural couples, and I tried to stay away from that when I was trying to get married. But I think that there's definitely common ground. Like you said, it's so important that you have the same religion. So that's your common ground. That's where you meet. That's how you know which way to raise your children. But we have things like food that still sometimes can be a clash. How do you deal with food in terms of like events? Which culture is stronger than the other? Where do you go shopping? How do you make the dinner table? How does it go?
I tend to be selfish a little bit, so mine is usually more dominant. I try to teach him to eat my own food, my own cuisine. But then he's very open-minded. He loves trying out dishes. But still, we differ a lot because I remembered one time he had this okra. So the way we make okra back home is different from the way they make theirs. So, and I'm just used to eating okra the way we make it back home. So there was one time he was so excited, he wanted to cook, and he's like, oh, he's going to make this okra dish for me, blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, okay, I'm looking forward to it. And I was trying to make my own fufu because I don't even know, like rice or mashed like that. Not eat okra with that. So I was trying to make it like, no, he's just going to fry the okra and then we'll eat it with rice or bread. I'm like, hell no, I'm not doing that with you. He tried to persuade me to eat that, but I'm like, no. And then another incident was same thing, fufu. I made, that was like first year of our marriage, so I made fufu for him to eat, and this guy couldn't get up to work the next like few hours. He's like, please do not make it again whenever I have work.
I mean, I think the whole interracial marriage is full of exploring, adventure. So it's really, exactly, and it's very interesting. But there is a saying that you just don't marry a partner, you marry the whole family. So how does the in-laws come, what is the role? How difficult or how easy was it for them to accept you?
Like for me, I wouldn't say, okay, maybe I would say I was lucky. I didn't have any issues with my in-laws at all. that brings us back to religion again. So his dad is very religious, and also his mom. So when he introduced me, the first thing was, oh, is she a Muslim? Yeah, is she practicing? The same thing goes to me as well. They asked me all of those questions, and we said yes, and that was it. So there's no, we didn't have any problems with regards to parents and in-laws. And I don't have extended in-laws. It's just him and his brother, and then mother and father. That's it. So.
Thank you so much, Amina Mustafa, for joining us today and sharing your experiences. But now it's time for a break. We want to ask our audience to share your views on interracial marriage and intercultural marriage, and also the culture shock around it on our social media platforms. We are on Facebook at VOA Africa. On Instagram and Twitter, we are on VOA Our Voices. We are also on WhatsApp, and our number is US country code +1 202 503 9025. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, and you're watching Our Voices. Joining us now is Dr. Chinyere Osuji, a visiting associate professor at the University of Maryland College Park in African American Studies. She is also the author of Boundaries of Love, Interracial Marriage, and the Meaning of Race. Welcome to the show, Dr. Osuji. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm such a fan of your show.
So my first question, Dr. Osuji, is what I assume is going to be on the mind of a lot of black women, which is, you know, a lot of successful men, we always accuse the men of, when a man is successful, he goes for a white woman, right? How true is this? What role does this play, really? Is there some type of correlation between success and men going for white women?
You know, that's a complicated question because when we look at the sociological literature, we see that technically this thing called status exchange, where like a black person has to compensate for their lower racial status by having a higher class status. The sociologists have been like, not so much. We're not seeing that. But we usually use education as that measure to measure class. But I suspect that if we used other measures such as income, wealth, and we might see other dynamics at play. I know that in other societies, for example, Brazil, this is definitely the case, where we see a lot of marriage or intermarriage happening involving that status exchange. So when we think about across societies, you know, we have to be very specific. But in the United States, it's a little bit more complicated. So there's no evidence for it, but I think a lot of us are seeing it. When we think about our ball players or our musicians who might marry somebody who's like not, you know, as accomplished.
So, you know, when we talk about marriage, children are also in the picture. So how are children affected or by interracial marriage or intercultural marriage? Do they struggle maybe with identity?
So what we see is that children don't really struggle with identity, that as long as they're in a loving home, there should be no problem. The issue is really society at large, right? That in the United States and in most places, interracial marriage is very stigmatized. And so other people often get uncomfortable when they see somebody and they can't readily identify what race they belong to, or can't easily identify them or see them with people who they think they might not belong with. For example, in my book, I interviewed parents, and sometimes white parents would be walking down the street with their biracial children, and they would get either accosted or like harassed by police even. So these are dynamics that are at play when we talk about children and these types of mixed family.
Yes, and there's also a lot of things, as we've talked about with our previous guests, that can keep a interracial marriage apart more than together because there's so many different things that comes on that plate. What are some of the things that people in interracial marriage should be mindful of in order to make their marriages and their unions successful? And maybe something that's in your book.
Well, I'm not a psychologist or a therapist, I have to say. But what I can say is that the marriages that I saw that were super successful, people who just showed that they loved each other and that listened to their partners. And those were the couples that were actually a pleasure to interview because you could see that they cared for one another, that they cared for their families, and they treated one another with respect, which I think is the ideal for any type of relationship, both monoracial or interracial.
So I had a follow-up question to that, Dr. Osuji. A lot of times we like to say that we are one or we don't see color. Do you find that perhaps accepting that you're different helps in maintaining those kinds of relationships, or more really believing that you are one? Which one of the two do you think helps in maintaining those kinds of relationships?
You know, I can't speak to the longevity of these relationships and what, you know, are positive outcomes as far as a well-being in these relationships. But what I have seen is that people are people, right? And so some relationships are successful, some aren't. When we think about things that sustain a relationship, it's always about respect, love, caring for other people, being attentive to your partner's needs. But when we think about interracial marriage, I don't think we should think about it as like some great strange thing that these people are doing, right? They're just regular people living their lives, you know, shopping at Target, getting their groceries, taking their kids to school, you know, nothing special.
Like, you know, when we are talking about two people who are coming from different background, different race, different culture. So when discussing about issues, for example, like let's take race. Race is an issue that's often discussed, that's often debated about. How can the couples entertain such issues? Like, for example, one could be taking sides, and it could be an issue of conflict in the marriage. So how can people in such kind of marriage discuss topics and make sure that their marriage is not affected by it?
Oh, so those are conversations that people should probably have before marriage, right? You should know if you're a Black person marrying somebody who is white and you know that their family members don't like Black people, well, then that's going to be a problem in the relationship, right? Or that's going to be a problem. And hopefully the two of you guys can navigate that, you know? So, I mean, I think it's important to recognize that we do live in a white supremacy. We live in a society where Blacks and people of color in general are disadvantaged. So having a partner that recognizes those things can only be a good thing.
Yes, and you also have very, very different cultures that have very strong, I guess, culture, like Chinese and Black. Could you maybe talk about when you see those unions, what, I guess, their challenges and their success come from?
Oh, so it's interesting you ask this because thinking about Africa, there's been a lot of investment of the Chinese in Africa. And what's happened also is that there's a lot of Chinese who've been migrating there and have been establishing families. And so some of the challenges can emerge when people arrive in Africa, you know, have kids, have a family, and then their work calls them back to China. And the question becomes, are they going to take the wife? Because there's been several instances in the news reports of people being upset at the women and children who are left behind by these Chinese corporations. So I think that's something that I've seen. But there's the other aspect where we can think about, you know, the United States and other countries and other societies where we're seeing a growing number of like Asian Black couples who are taking over social media, and they look like they're having like a good time in their lives.
My question, it's interesting that Ariane asked that question, Dr. Osuji. How common is it for Chinese and Africans to get married?
I don't know the statistics on that. I think that would be really difficult to find. And I think it would be very country specific.
I mean, let's talk about boundaries. You know, our previous guest was saying her husband could be asking her to do something, but she might not be comfortable and she'll say no. But it's his culture, it's his life, he might still want to do it. So how do partners keep the boundaries to allow each other keep on doing what we used to do?
You know, it's so funny because when I was listening to that story, I was thinking, man, fried okra is so delicious. She missed out. And I am as a fan of okra soup with fufu, I like that too. But fried okra is delicious too. But again, just being respectful of your partner's needs and like, you know, validating their needs to express their culture, their needs to feel loved and cared for. Those are the things that make a successful relationship.
Yeah, I think on social media, she just mentioned something about social media. We're seeing a lot of people maybe using their interracial marriage and relationship to have viewers. What do you think? You think that that's something that people are seeing as exotic and they're using that to capitalize on social media?
I can't argue in real life. Maybe, maybe not. I mean, Instagram and all these social media, apps are all about people showing their best lives. We're not going to see them like looking sloppy in their pajamas or them fighting, right? Like, you're supposed to show your best self on social media. And so I think it's the same for same-race couples as well as interracial couples. But also have to be aware that the algorithms might be showing us what we want to see.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Dr. Chinyere Osuji, for joining us and lending us your insight on this discussion. So, ladies, I'm going to throw it back to you. Mm-hmm. I'm going to say, Seminesh, tell us, how is your own interracial marriage going?
Yes, you are in an interracial marriage. Rwandan and Ethiopian.
I keep telling you that it's not interracial marriage, it is intercultural marriage. And we really have to make a note of the difference. Interracial marriage is between two races, like black and white, for example. Mm-hmm. Intercultural is between two cultures, mm-hmm. or it could be between two countries, like the case in me. I'm from Ethiopia, he's from Rwanda. Mm-hmm. So we brought into different cultures.
Similash, you tell us all this. You tell us that your family tree says you're Ethiopian. Your passport, you fact say that you're Ethiopian. There's fact, and then there's just what my eyes see. Let me catch up our viewers. Let me tell our viewers.
I am as black as anybody who was born and raised. All my family in Africa.
Intercultural.
Let me tell our viewers why Similash has the most gorgeous child that his DNA cocktail just has to be. Wow.
It's just a blessing from God, but he is as African as
he's so beautiful.
Me and his father.
He looks Indian a little bit sometimes. Some pictures when I looked at him, he's an Indian. Sometimes you look Ethiopian. He's just cute.
She's supporting me. She's supporting my argument.
But that doesn't change the fact that it's an intercultural marriage.
So how is the Ethiopian-Rwandan relationship? Should people go for it?
Oh, yes. We are strengthening that bilateral relationship.
Right, that's good. How has your experience been?
I would say intercultural or interracial relationship, it spices up relationships. Mm-hmm. It's, it's like an adventure you go on for life. Mm. You are always exploring new things, new holidays, mm-hmm. new adventures. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. And you get to learn new language, right? You get to learn new food recipes. And you get to meet each other's families, and you'll be telling them about all these exciting things you tell each other. Yes. But another important thing is it also helps you appreciate differences. Mm. We come from different cultures. Mm. We have different ways of looking at things. Mm. So when things emerge, we sit, we talk, and we'll be like, aha, so you can also do this in a different way. Right. So it's always an eye-opening experience for me.
Well, let me tell you,
food. I know Aria has something to say.
I'm completely different. When I was... Because when I was thinking of a spouse, I had, dated different cultures and things like that. When I thought about marriage per se, long term, I said to God, please, somebody from my country, my culture, my village, my everything. Because I felt like I wanted to make my life easy.
And you got that.
I did. I got that. My husband, literally, his parents and my parents are from the same village, speak the same language. I think two of them went to the same middle school and high school, because I kept feeling like I love my country, Burundi. Although I'm Burundian American, I love my country, Burundi, and I kept feeling like later on in life, if I marry maybe a Nigerian, and I want to retire in Burundi, which is the most beautiful place on the earth.
Now. That's not gonna happen.
I didn't think it was fair for me to drag him to Burundi in his 70s, 80s, when he wanted to maybe go back to Nigeria. And I was not gonna retire in Nigeria I don't know anybody in Nigeria. So I kept feeling like we were going to have that struggle later in life. And so I just said, let me keep it simple. Burundian from Bujumbura, who was raised in the diaspora, and all these other things, and I got them. So my life is easy. And then another thing. I kept thinking, like, it would be difficult if I maybe end up with a white person, to have to translate every single joke at the parties. So
that comes as part of the job. But
yes.
I'm not saying like everything is 100% easy. There could be struggles, but the struggles are not really struggle. They are more of like adventures. Exactly. Yes. You know, like through those struggles, you'll be learning, and you are like an ambassador for your country. That's you'll be teaching him about your culture. He'll be teaching you about his culture.
That's true.
And probably it's easier for us because we are both from East Africa. We are not. Our cultures are not too different.
Can you imagine? I'm just like listening to both of you, listening to our guests and everything.
I was going to ask you, like,
I'm thinking to myself,
yes.
I'm not sure because I want the best of both worlds.
Which cultures eliminate themselves?
I love my culture so much. I love my culture so much. But at the same time, I want that get out of jail free card where I'll be excused and the in-laws are going to be like, you know, she's not from here. Just excuse her so that I can get away with everything. So I'm not sure. I think it depends on which works best in my favor.
Right.
Ask me again.
I mean, when it comes to in-laws, it may not always be like, oh, she doesn't know, she'll learn. It could be also because, oh, she's offending us, you know, how can she not know this?
Family can really get into it.
Exactly.
Like, really
especially people who are not exposed to cultures, who are so conservative, they could be offended easily, even though, like, they will be like, how come she doesn't know?
Right.
They don't know, like, you come from a different culture or you might not know.
And then, they're not tolerant. Your spouse would be tolerant.
Yeah. All right, everybody. So thank you so much. This is our show for today. On behalf of everyone here at the Voice of America and my co-host sitting here with me, I'm Amina Aliyu. We'll see you next time.
Montana, and right now there is a ground stop on our airport.
我注意到有关报道，正在了解核实情况。
I want to congratulate Congressman Horsford on his election. And whatever you want to talk about, from my perspective, is how can we make some progress?
hot, bro.
Sit down, don't move. Now I'm approach. No. Ma ragazzi, finiamo per...
Montana, and right now there is a ground stop on our airport.
我注意到有关报道，正在了解核实情况。
Well, I want to congratulate Congressman Horsford on his election. And whatever you want to talk about, from my perspective, is how can we make some progress?